Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast with your host, Andrew Keel. This is the podcast where you can get the education you need to invest 100% passively in the highly profitable niche of mobile home parks.
Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Keel, and today we have an exciting episode for you with special guest Daniel Burnham, managing member at Timberline Construction Group. Before we dive in, if you get value out of this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a review. It means the world to me and helps us get more listeners. All right, let's dive in. Daniel started with Timberline while pursuing his degree in business management from the University of West Florida. Since then, he has developed extensive experience in construction and in the industry of temporary housing. Timberline Construction Group's primary focus is working with federal, state, and local governments to assist in immediate and long-term recovery efforts after natural disasters. And they've also developed multiple mobile home communities and have also expanded multiple mobile home communities. So excited to dive in. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much. I appreciate being on the podcast here.
Yeah. Let's start out. One of the top questions I get from a lot of new investors is, hey, what happens when a tornado comes through and rips up, half of the trailers in your park? Like what does that look like from an investment standpoint? And how do you hedge that risk? Or is it just kind of, one of those situations where you're just out of luck? You have been dealt, hands-on with a lot of those types of situations. So maybe tell us, from experience, what that looks like.
Yeah, so we have, Andrew, we've responded to disasters in a lot of different ways: fires, tornadoes, hurricanes, flooding, and each one kind of presents its own response, if you will. And a lot of our response is government issued. The government, whether it's federal, state, or local government, hires us to come in and do a scope of work that may include a full replacement of a manufactured home. It may just include demolition, may include debris removal. And so we work hand in hand often with FEMA, with state agencies, with local governments to really help with that immediate response. We also, and probably more important for your listeners, we also work with a lot of private investors that have had scenarios like that recently down in Florida where some flooding occurred and the homes within the park needed to be removed and new homes needed to be put in. And we help them and are currently helping them do that. That scope of work includes demolishing existing units that may be damaged to the point of irrepair. And so we remove everything that's on site. And in some cases, like in flooding, there may be a FEMA flood map that's been updated that requires some elevating of the new units. We work with private investors to do a number of different things that may be including providing a new product to put back in place. It may be getting the existing home simply off the lot so that they can reevaluate what to do with the park moving forward. Or they may have a good plan and they want to go back with an existing home on the park. And so we help them with the home. We help them with the site prep. We help them if there's damage to existing utilities within the park. We can go in and test the utilities, water, sewer, and storm drain to determine whether or not those are still adequate. And then once, if they decide to put a final product in and we can help them do that, install the unit, build steps, ramps, or carports, sheds, or driveways, walkways, even to the final point of sodding and ready to occupy the unit. We help and have helped and enjoy helping people get back on their feet after disasters. So that's a little bit of what we do and how it works.
That's so cool. I have a list of questions and then I just keep coming up with new ones. But what we've been told, as mobile home park investors and, through different seminars and such, is that like when Katrina came through and messed up a lot of, mobile home parks, is that, the homes that got messed up either by wind or flooding, they were hauled away. And then FEMA brought in, because there's a need in that vicinity for housing, FEMA came in and brought these FEMA homes and filled these parks up again with these FEMA homes. And, basically from what I've heard, right, I haven't gone through this myself, is that FEMA was like, offering checks to people to help get them back on their feet, even if they didn't have insurance on their mobile home prior. Is that what really happens, Daniel?
Yeah, very good question and excited to talk about it. So FEMA typically jumps in and helps when insurance does not. And so, the response that they do and the money that they give, it really varies depending on the presidential disaster declaration and what money's made available. But I will tell you, for your listeners, there have been a lot of times that park owners have benefited from, I hate to say it like this, from a natural disaster. If the situation happens where their homes are destroyed, I'll just tell you what I've seen before. I've seen FEMA come in, help clean up the park with an agreement to rent the spaces so that they can put temporary housing and ultimately people in those temporary housing units for 12 to 18 months. And so what happens is, park owners, their park is damaged and it needs a lot of work. And so FEMA helps in that cost of moving some of that old product out and making the pad sites available for new units to be placed in. They'll bring, again, temporary housing units, they'll bring in units. One of the things that we do after a disaster is we help manage and install those temporary housing units for FEMA. So some of your listeners may have had parks and or do have parks and have been in areas of disaster, and we've worked within their parks bringing in temporary housing units for FEMA. What I would encourage listeners to do is, after a disaster, if your park has space or if your park has had some damage where it may create space or pads for temporary housing units to be placed, I would highly recommend listeners reach out to FEMA, make it known to them the spaces that are available, how many are available, because most of the time after disaster, they are actively looking for places to put temporary housing units. And if you've just had, mobile homes destroyed in your park and you're losing that income, this is a great way to kind of get that backfill, those pads backfilled and get income coming in, and also help the community and help those that have been displaced by disaster.
That's a great tip there, Daniel. Thank you for that. And with FEMA, so they will still own the homes,
Mhm.
so they're not giving these homes away to the tenants that lost their home because they didn't have insurance, right? They're not giving the homes to them, or are they?
No, good question. In most cases, especially ones that we're aware of, they are simply a temporary resident. And so they do not sell the units. Now, there may be special cases that I'm unaware of that happens, but
Sure.
in most cases, it is a 18-month agreement that they have with the local jurisdiction where FEMA comes in, provides this temporary housing, and typically within 18 months, there's other programs that are available for longer term housing, but the FEMA temporary housing unit's typically an 18-month.
And then what happens with those homes afterwards? Do you guys come in and, the tenant moves out, tear the homes down and then move them to a holding lot until they're like sold at auction? Or, is there another plan with those homes after those 18 months are up?
So after the 18 months are up, really it's at FEMA's discretion what they do with them. And they've done a number of different things. Sometimes, they've donated those to different charities. Sometimes they've donated them to other organizations that could use them. FEMA does have staging yards where
Mm.
the units may go back and be rehabbed for some other purpose. It really varies. But most of the time, those units are taken off of that park pad, and now you've got a park pad that's ready for a new unit to be placed. But typically, FEMA will ask us to remove those units and take those back to the holding.
Gotcha. And this may be a question you may not, be familiar with, but it's more of an insurance question. But like on all of our parks, we typically carry loss of business income insurance.
Mhm.
And so, in a bad scenario like this, a natural disaster, we would have income for either 12 or 18 months, to help pay our bills while we kind of get things back to normal. Have you seen that play out prior? Like, has that, with the parks that you're coming into, like, are they needing that money, or are they, is this FEMA kind of temporary housing thing keeping them afloat?
That's a good question. And frankly, I don't know the answer to it. That's an area that I don't get to see or privileged
Sure.
to. I could only speculate.
Sure, sure. No worries. Well, let's pivot a little bit, Daniel, because that's really awesome. I appreciate you sharing that about the natural disasters and the temporary housing piece. Is there anything we missed on that before we move into what you've done with developing, mobile home communities? Like anything you think that park owners should know or passive investors should know about this? I mean, it's good to know that FEMA is using these parks still as like a way to get housing quickly into an area that desperately needs it. Have you guys worked like on some of the recent stuff in Western North Carolina, like some of the hurricane damage over there?
Yeah, personally, our company has not been in the western side of North Carolina. Now we have worked for probably the last 3 years on the eastern area of North Carolina, providing some more longer term response and permanent housing, state funded permanent housing on the eastern side. To
Gotcha.
answer your question, though, I would encourage park owners to just reach out to FEMA. And some people may say, well, how do I do that? Well, one of the ways to do that, FEMA has a federal acquisitions website called sam.gov, and it's simply sam.gov. And they can go and see what all needs the federal government has. And most of the time, when they ask about are there mobile home parks in the area that would be interested or have capacity for pads for them to place temporary housing units, they will post what they call an RFI on sam.gov, which is a request for information, asking the public, is there anyone out there that has pads available for FEMA? And they'll have typically an email that you can respond to, letting them know what you have available, so they can help use that in times of need.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, Daniel.
Mhm.
Let's pivot. How did you guys get into then, expanding and building mobile home communities from scratch, like the development side of things?
Yeah, great question. An exciting one for us because, we work often with FEMA and have for many, many years on the management of installing and deactivating and maintaining temporary housing units. And we were working with FEMA on a contract after Hurricane Michael in the panhandle of Florida. And the question was asked, hey, we don't have a place to put manufactured home parks or put manufactured homes. We need a place to put them. And we've identified a few spots that the city will give us, the fairgrounds and a few other places, but they need some work. It's just land. There's no utilities there. There's no electrical or sewer or water. Can you guys help us modify or develop this land to make it so that we can put travel trailers and manufactured homes? And so within about a 90-day period, we took 8 different sites, about 400 pads, and developed them into suitable spots for travel trailers and manufactured homes. So in
In
that
90 days.
in 90 days, yeah. So it was exciting.
Wow.
And FEMA has a way of motivating you to kind of get things done quicker than you would in the public. And so we were excited to do it, happy that we met the mile marker. So it was an exciting day for us. That's how we got into the business, kind of with a bang. And through that process, we like to hire a lot of people that are diversified in their background.
Mm.
And so, as we were posed with the question, we ask ourselves internally, do we have the resources, the manpower, and the technical knowledge to do this type of work? So we were excited to look back in 90 days and see what we were able to do.
That sounds just like a whirlwind. 400 lots, build them in 90 days. What type of material did you guys use? Did you have to, is it still a mobile home park to this day? Or was it kind of decommissioned after the need for temporary housing went away?
Yeah, good question. So, the roadways and things were mostly aggregate to kind of help speed the process up. And the sites were temporarily donated for this purpose.
Mm.
And so once the need was no longer there, not us, but another contractor came in and decommissioned the sites back to the original use.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Wow. So yeah, what'd you do for like the sewer and the water lines? Did you use like PVC and the whole bit and
Mhm.
all of that, PEX, water lines? What'd you use it all for? What'd you do?
So there was a local sewer connection that we were able to tap into through help with the city and utility providers. We were able to tap in and install stub outs right close to the pad sites, some of them directly underneath and within the pad. Same thing with the water line. We tapped into a main water line and was able to stub up right close to the unit. And so really we look at the construction, the civil side of things in kind of one look, and that is how do we get utilities and things right up close to the pad? How do we get the pad built, ground to make sure that the unit water runs away from the unit? And so we'll get those utilities up to the pad site itself, including electrical, right? We'll set a pedestal, 200 amp pedestal there. And then our installation crews will come in and connect to the pedestal, connect to the stub outs and to the water source. So all fun and a lot to do.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a temporary, park that you built. Tell us about some of the other ones that you've built that are still, existing to this day, that are, more longer term expansion projects or, ground up.
Yeah, so we've worked in a lot of different states. I think one of our benefits with working with people, private investors that are interested in building or expanding manufactured home parks is because of our FEMA experience and because of our ability to mobilize where the work is needed. We're just a little bit different than other contractors. We'll go where the work is. We can do that. We're pretty flexible. We're pretty nimble and agile in that ability. And so we've built parks and or expanded parks all across the United States. Currently working on a park in Michigan, which has been interesting with the weather. But we've worked in a number of other places with cold weather, and so we have some experience in that area. But we've expanded parks in Tennessee and Texas and Florida, and again
And you
many.
do everything, right? Like the roads, the water lines, sewer lines, installing the homes, concrete pads, footers. Like you guys do it all.
Yeah, we can do as much or as little as the client would like for us to do.
Gotcha.
But I will say, there's some efficiency, I think, when the client and the contractor works together. And from our perspective, the more scope that we can oversee and coordinate and manage, typically there's a benefit for the client. They see some time efficiencies. They even see some financial efficiencies there that we can pass on to them. And so, yeah, we'll do everything from virgin ground, moving the dirt, installing the utilities, electrical, sewer, water, storm drain. And then, if they want to purchase the unit from us, we have a manufacturing facility. Be happy to work with them on providing a product that meets what they're looking for and installing it for them.
Very nice. That's so cool. Sounds like you guys are the full package. When it comes to designing and building, mobile home communities, what would you say are some of like the ideal functions, ideal amenities, ideal kind of setups that you're looking for, like that you want to implement? Like what are the most important features or considerations that you take into account when expanding or, building from raw land?
From a building perspective and development perspective, having utilities close by is a huge money saver. Having the ability to tap into water, adequate water source, and adequate sewer source, those are really key benefits that I think any investor, anyone looking at building a park should consider. I think that's critical. It's extremely cost beneficial if those utilities and sewer connections are close. Electrical power company can typically work with us to get the power source that we need. So that's a little less concerning, but definitely water and sewer, having those things close is extremely beneficial.
Have you guys done private, your systems like wastewater treatment plants and lagoon systems and built those as well?
We've done some wastewater treatment systems. We've helped repair some of those. Those are beneficial when needed, but nothing beats having the ability to tie into the local systems.
Public systems. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What are some mistakes that you guys have made in, development of mobile home communities that, some of our listeners can maybe learn from?
Very good question. And, I would say probably a benefit. I don't know if it's a mistake necessarily, but probably a benefit is including the contractor early. If you're looking at a site, including the people that you plan to use to help develop the site, whether that's the contractor, whether that's the engineer, include those early so that way you can do a really good job on due diligence. And again, not necessarily a mistake that we've made, but it's just one that we see often. And that is surprises after the fact. You never want a surprise after you put together the budget. You know what the numbers look like, you know where you need to be, and everything kind of the stars align, and you've got a good investment there. Surprises are typically unwelcome. So that's a big key factor there. The other thing that I'd say from our perspective, and I guess this could be for your listeners as well, is know what you do well and then know what you don't do well. And so a lot of the work that we do is in-house. There are things that we manage and we subcontract to others. And it's because, we know that, for example, asphalt paving, we don't want to go to a new area and
Move all that equipment across the country, right? Yeah.
Correct. Right. So working with a local, asphalt provider, paver is typically what we do. We may or may not work with a local electrical subcontractor. Most of the time, though, I'll tell you that we do because they know what the power company needs and requires and wants to see, and that makes things a little bit easier. And so, when you're looking at that, know the people you need to get involved, and then hopefully they're being transparent and honest with you, and that is that have them do what they do best. And if that's us, which we'd love to help your listeners develop a park, we'll be transparent and honest and open with them. And if there are tasks that we can manage and subcontract, then we will relay that. And I think that's critical, to be open and honest with the team, to emphasize what you know how to do and what you don't know how to do and what others can do better.
Totally. What would you say, Daniel, is like the average cost per lot to develop and get it ready for a home?
If I've been asked that question 1,000 times, I mean, I definitely that's the number one question that people ask, especially at trade shows and things that we go to. That varies so much. It really depends on what you have there, what resources, are already to the site, what needs to get to the site, how you lay out the site. Somebody might be an investor of yours might be interested in taking a 200-acre park and putting 100 units in it, or they may want to take a 200-acre park and put 500 units in it. It really changes based on the end need. So I'll give you some very widespread numbers. It could be $20,000 a lot. It could be $100,000 a lot. It really just depends on what the end product is.
If it was going to be just like a middle of the road, asphalt streets, paved off street parking for 2 vehicles, city water and sewers right out front, you can tap into, just like a ballpark figure, just to get a little more narrow there, just for the listeners. Like, what would you guesstimate?
I'll preference that with saying it really depends on, right, how well the site balances, right?
Sure.
Is there a lot of fill that needs to be brought in? Is there a lot of dirt that needs to be removed? And so I think 30 to 50 or 60 is probably a fair range in there. To get any closer to that would be a little bit tough, but be happy to talk to whoever your listeners are that might be interested in kind of drilling down on some of that. And once we look at a site, once we do some measurements of infill and how well that site balances, and really know what the customer or the client is interested in, then we can get pretty close without the back of the napkin numbers.
Sure. Yeah, just was wondering, like, high level.
Sure.
But yeah, Daniel, if you were looking to invest as a passive investor into, an operator's ground up mobile home park development project, what key factors would you consider and look into before investing in that project?
And you're asking on behalf, if I were a passive investor looking to invest in a park?
Correct. Yeah. Just what, with your knowledge base, kind of how would you go about it, to try to, safeguard your investment?
I think there's some truth to bad data in, if you put bad data in, you get bad data out.
Mm-hmm.
So what I see, I don't want to say most often, but often is, a group that may not quite do the due diligence that's needed. And so what I would be looking for would be someone who's really looked at the details.
Like what? Like when you say details, like zoning or building department, or like
And
how far the utility infrastructure is away, like that kind of stuff, or is it more like details of, you know, like plumbing materials and accessibility, things like that?
Well, not necessarily plumbing materials. Maybe because of our business, that's a less of a concern of mine. I think the scarcity of material supplies has kind of went away. What we seen 2 or 3 years ago, where you had to pre-order stuff early, that's kind of past and done. And so that doesn't necessarily concern me as much. But I would say the due diligence of zoning, and environmental concerns, and how far do you have to run that water line, or are we building the park as efficiently as we possibly can? Meaning, are we maximizing the pad sites that are needed? More pads you can fit in there and still acquire the end result that you're looking for. The more you can spread that cost out over a per pad site. So those are the things that I would make sure that the group that I would be investing with has looked at, because those things can add up to be big things and ultimately blow a budget, and nobody likes to be on that side of things. And so, yeah, the zoning, environmental concerns, right? Are there soil issues? Are there flood risk? Is there contaminants on the site? All those things. Now, then you look to the sales side of it, depending on what the way that the pads are going to be provided to the public, whether it's a park-owned unit or whether it's a leased pad site. I think having an investor that's also done the due diligence, not only on the development side, but also on the sales side, knowing their competitors, knowing, what the local market yields and how that park is set aside from other parks, I think is important as well.
Definitely. No, that's great insight there. One question when you were talking that came up is, for those investors that are looking at buying an existing mobile home park and looking at the utility infrastructure and doing due diligence on that, what would be your ideal infrastructure, right? Would it be, PVC, sewer lines? And we see a lot of cast iron water lines that have, get corroded and things like that. So I guess what would be like your ideal utility infrastructure materials for sewer, water? Like what would the pedestals, would they all be 200 amp like you mentioned earlier? How many transformers, like what would you say would be that ideal kind of utility infrastructure? And then I'm curious your thoughts on some of the older materials that have been used and like their life expectancy.
Yeah, good question. The engineer would probably dictate what specific materials are designed. And so I would probably say consult with your engineer. All right, get them engaged early. I personally would stay away from cast iron if you could. I mean, that can present some problems.
It's
That
just
other
so popular. Like a lot of these parks are 50 plus years old,
True.
and like that's just what they used. So, what is a more ideal kind of water main material?
Yeah, I mean, look, PVC is a great product. It's a fairly inexpensive product. PVC is a great, great, great option. There are other great options as well to go with. And so, I guess what I would say to any investors, if you're looking at a park, again, engage the contractor earlier. For example, us, we could go out and there's specific tests that we could do. We could dig out portions of the water line and figure out what type of water line is there. Those are things that will cost a little bit of money on the front end, but will definitely save some cost and expenses on the back end. But if there's concerns, we can help with that. To get specific on some of your questions here, your pedestals, for example, electrical, I would highly recommend 200 amp. Most manufactured homes today are going to need a 200 amp service. And so if you have a 100 amp service there, just know that, whatever the home that's placed there is, if it leaves, there's most likely an update that's going to be needed to that pedestal. And so factor all of that cost in. And again, I cannot stress enough, get the contractor, whether it's us or someone else, involved early so that they can help you do that. They can help vet out and be attentive to those details, whether or not it's connected to city sewer, whether or not that, you've got issues with a treatment facility, testing those things, really digging in and getting your hands into the operations of whether or not they're going to last. Because like you said, and you asked the question, how long will some of these things last? Well, some, if they're taken care of, last a good while. But
What is that? 50 years, 100 years? What's a good while
yeah,
that
so
you've seen?
I've seen components last 50 plus years if they're installed and use the right material and they're taken care of. So I've seen 50 plus years. And I think that would be a good target for someone, when you're updating a park to go with. First off, you're going to have to build it to the local jurisdictional code, which are going to specify some upgrades that typically were not specified 50 years ago. So they're going to help you achieve some of those changes that will help extend the life of the product you're putting out there. But yeah, I'd say you can get it easily a 50 years out of it. Now, again, 50 years out of the 50-year-old park, you're definitely at the life expectancy there. You might can get longer, but if you're looking at a park, I would just highly advise, pay attention to those details, look at it, understand the risk of taking on a product that's old and maybe has some issues, because that's going to cost something.
Yeah. And I would say like probably 70-80% of the parks that we buy are over 50 years old, and the water lines and sewer lines have never been replaced. So they're at their life expectancy. Yeah. They're mostly galvanized, water lines, and, like clay tile, sewer lines in the Midwestern parks that we've bought. So, if they were installed right and maintained at a decent level, you think that they, can withstand 50 years and even longer than that, if I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, I mean, they can. A lot of times vegetation and things will cause issues if trees have grown up around where the pipe is installed. All of those things could play a factor in the life expectancy of it. So it could be a risk, and it could be costly. Engage the contractor early.
Okay, awesome. Well, Daniel, if any of our listeners would like to get a hold of you to talk about, temporary housing solutions or, mobile home park development services, how can they connect with you to learn more about you and your company?
Yeah, sure. So 2 different ways. Number one, if you go to our website, it's www.timberlinecg.com. And there's a contact form there that you can fill out, and that goes straight to my desk. And so that's a great way to reach out to us, just to let us know what you got going on. And so we can pinpoint you in the right direction. Be happy to talk to you. It's free of charge. Happy to talk through what your ideas are and see how we could work together on it. And then I'll give you our office number. It's 800-848-8300. And you can ask specifically for Clay Curtis, and he can get you in contact with the people that you need to get you going.
Awesome, Daniel. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for today, folks. Reminder, if you got value out of this episode, please leave us a review. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Would you like to see mobile home park value add projects in progress? If so, follow us on Instagram @PassiveMHPInvesting for photos and awesome videos from our recent mobile home park acquisitions. Once again, that's @PassiveMHPInvesting on Instagram. See you there.